Administration is a terrible way to run a business, particularly in a fast-paced, innovative economy. Is when you shift your business out of entrepreneurial mode, out of venture mode, into administration mode. You turn off that entrepreneurial engine, and you're not creating new value anymore. You're just replicating your previous value.
Most organizations believe that bureaucracy and administrative control are inevitable as they grow, but that belief is quietly destroying innovation, productivity, and growth. That's why Mark Packard and I co-authored a new book titled Venture Mode: Escape the Administration Trap by Finding and Unleashing Entrepreneurial Leaders. It explains why administration mode has become institutionalized, why it's detrimental in the modern economy, and how it actually drains entrepreneurial energy and dynamism from companies of every size. Today's conversation introduces venture mode as the solution, a fundamentally different way to run organizations, replacing internal control with external customer focus, planning with adaptiveness, and cost-cutting with continuous value creation. In this episode, you'll learn why administration mode creates bureaucracy and stagnation, even when leaders have good intentions, how positivist management science shaped business schools and trapped organizations in the wrong operating model, and what it really means to run a company in venture mode, and why entrepreneurial leadership scales far beyond startups.
This is the Value Creators Podcast, your source for a new kind of business education, escaping from business administration mode and entering dynamic entrepreneurship mode. We're guided by entrepreneurial economics, which is the source of all growth and positive change for businesses of all sizes in all markets. We talk to experienced experts in value creation so that there's business learning for you in every episode.
Mark, welcome. This is a special edition of the Value Creators Podcast.
Hey, Hunter. How are you been?
Good. We are celebrating the publication of a new book that you and I have authored together. It's called Venture Mode, subtitled Escape the Administration Trap by Finding and Unleashing Entrepreneurial Leaders. So it's an exciting look into the future of what's possible in both entrepreneurship and business education.
Yep.
And I think where we might start today is on the problem we're trying to solve, which is by introducing venture mode, we're escaping the administration trap. So let's start there. What's the administration trap and what's administration mode in business?
Yeah, so the terminology is ours, but the concept really got introduced not too long ago in Silicon Valley. It was Paul Graham who coined the term manager mode. And that was in reference to a talk that Brian Chesky, who's the founder of Airbnb, a talk that he gave to the Y Combinator audience. They had a retreat with a bunch of their founders, and Brian Chesky was invited to give a talk, and he talked about this prevailing wisdom in Silicon Valley that as a venture grows and starts to reach market acceptance, the traditional wisdom goes that when you start to scale, you need a manager, you need a professional with experience to run the company through that rocky period of scaling, because it's really challenging. It's very fast paced. And it's ideal to have someone that knows what they're doing, has experience growing a business to do that. And what Chesky basically argued is that, history's not very kind to that traditional wisdom. That actually, when you turn over the reins to a professional manager, things don't go as well as you might expect. In fact, the performance is pretty poor. And so Paul Graham wrote about this talk in a blog post shortly after, and he coined the term founder mode in contrast to manager mode, and that what seems to be the more correct position is, maybe you don't want to give up founder mode after all. You don't necessarily want to turn it into manager mode. And the core idea there is pretty spot on, I think. But the terminology is a little bit off. You don't necessarily have to have your founder in charge, but you do need to have an entrepreneurial leader, because what happens often is businesses over time, just as the business grows, it becomes more bureaucratic, or in changes of leadership, the mode of operation changes from just this entrepreneurial discovery and adaptation, this agility that is common to ventures, into this administrative organization. And we've known this for a long time, that this is the process that tends to happen. As organizations get large, they have to become structured and functional, and have all these departments and compartmentalize divisions of labor, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is administration is a terrible way to run a business, particularly in a fast-paced, innovative economy. I know you've harped on this for years now, that any company to sustain its performance has to be agile. It has to be innovative. It has to be pursuing relentless new customer value instead of banking on what they've always done, because what you've always done isn't going to be good enough in a few years. And so that's the core argument here, is that that the traditional wisdom of administration just needs to go away. We need to advocate. We need to teach entrepreneurial leadership, that you want to keep your organization in what we call venture mode, to be run by entrepreneurs in an entrepreneurial fashion, so that it keeps innovating, it keeps adapting, and keeps getting better, instead of trying to streamline and make everything so efficient that the entrepreneurial engine just gets kind of stalled.
Yeah, so we're going to describe venture mode and entrepreneurial leadership. We'll identify those precisely, but let's just stay with the problem for a second, Mark. As you say, this administration mode has become institutionalized. As you say, it's inevitable for big companies, but we don't think it is inevitable. In fact, we think it's wrong. It's also, you've used the phrase, the iron grip of the business school. Not everybody goes to business school, but institutionally, they kind of set the tone, they set the agenda, and this is what they teach, administration mode. So delve into a little bit, why is it institutionalized? Why is the standard mode for big companies, even though it's wrong? And why is it the standard mode of teaching in business school?
Well, we talk about it in some depth, of the history of how we got here in the book, and I don't want to recount the whole history of how we got here necessarily right here. But the essence of it is that a particular philosophy of science won the day in the early 20th century, and we're still paying the price today. And the reason it won the day, it's called positivism. Positivism is this idea, this scientific philosophy that the world in all of its aspects is there for the understanding, and that science can and will uncover all of its mysteries and be able to understand exactly how everything works, and be able to predict exactly what will happen, and so that we can engineer a better world in the future, right? If you've ever read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, it's that concept of psychohistory. And the problem with that philosophy of science is that it's just wrong when it comes to social science. It's perfectly valid and fine and even correct when it comes to the natural sciences. But when you introduce conscious, thinking, willful people, it just breaks down, right? Because you cannot predict what unpredictable people will choose. I mean, we can kind of predict people. We know, understand people, and we understand their preferences and stuff like that. I'm not saying that you can't make a prediction. What I'm saying is we can't know with any type of scientific rigor what people will do in the future, because we learn, we change, our preferences evolve, and we're supposed to, right? I think you and I have talked in the past about how our life is this endless value learning cycle. We're always changing our preferences because we want to find something better all the time. We often revert to our familiar, our go-to favorite things, but we try new things all the time, not all the time, but often, because we're looking for, what if there's something even better out there? And because of that, this whole paradigm of positivism is false. It collapses when you are trying to study people and economy, social phenomena. But it still, despite its flaws, it ended up winning the day, with, and largely as a result of World War II. Philosophers of science were in a long, argument over the philosophy of science. The positivists, the anti-positivists were arguing these things basically when World War II broke out, and the arguments were happening mainly in Europe. Europe was the center of academic debate at the time, and the war just completely disrupted the conversations, and there was mass immigration from Europe among academics, and most of them came to the U.S., and it shifted the academic center to the U.S. But the U.S. was already predominantly positivist, right? We had this culture of scientific discovery, this reverence for science, and we lauded all the scientific discoveries that were being made in the hard natural sciences. And so when all these academics flooded over here, the ones that got all the best jobs, the high academic positions, were the positivists. And that basically ended the debates, and positivism won the day. And as a consequence, the social sciences turned hard into positivism. And it's been kind of this interesting paradigm that we've been fighting against ever since. And this administration mode comes out of that paradigm. This concept of a scientific way of studying and doing business, which is the epitome of what we're calling administration mode. That comes out of that paradigm.
Yeah, and in fact, they call it management science. So it's the management application of this positivism, as you call it. It's the scientific method applied to business. It's quantification, it's modeling, it's algebra, it's all of those things. And in fact, right after World War II, you give us the history in the section of the book, which is the University of Chicago and Herbert Simon, and he actually wrote the book on the administrative mode, right? That became very, very influential. So maybe that's one instance we can point to of where that got institutionalized.
Yeah. Yep. And ever since, the business school has taught business administration. I mean, it's in the name of the degree. Mm-hmm. A degree in business administration. That's what they teach. That's what we teach. I mean, I'm a business professor.
Well, you don't teach it, but everybody else does.
Yeah.
And so there are costs to this, Mark. And, one of it is the qualitative cost in organization. We call it bureaucracy, and big companies don't seem to be able to avoid bureaucracy. So you might shed some light on that. And then we've tried to calculate the cost to the economy. We distilling various pieces of research and white papers and other publications and data, we came up with approximately a 50% hit on productivity. growth could have been twice what it was over decades. Therefore, massive potential increase in GDP. So we're doing half as well in business productivity that we could otherwise be doing if we weren't fighting administration mode. So I asked you two things in one, but one is bureaucracy and why is it so inevitable, and two, say a little bit more about the cost of productivity.
Well, the bureaucracy is it's largely kind of a part of the evolution of a business into a large organization, but it's also, and probably more so, due to the way we teach managers how to manage. Right. So this checklist approach, this scientific approach, this view that we can engineer an optimum process for any organization, that hey, if you follow this blueprint, this is what we found will be the maximum efficiency, the highest ROR, whatever metrics we use to study. This blueprint approach, we stamp these cookie cutter organizational methods into the various organizations, that doesn't work, because every organization is its own unique phenomenon, right? It's got a different value proposition with different people, different resources, different processes, and so trying to build this kind of blueprint that works for everyone never works. Every organization is different. I guess that doesn't totally explain bureaucracy. But what bureaucracy, why it happens is because, well, one, you're dealing with a principal agent problem, and you're trying to figure out how do you get employees to maximize their productivity while they're incentivized, otherwise, but not. I mean, that's kind of a simplistic view of employees, I think. But and so you end up with these managers to try to oversee projects and administrate the projects efficiently. And I get the impulse to do that, but it's just it's based on an assumption that what the company is doing now will work for a long time, right? So bureaucracy, I guess you could say, could work for very, very stable businesses that can become super streamlined and efficient, but that's almost no business today. So that's kind of the history of bureaucracy, and we've kind of assumed that model works for a long time, and increasingly we're seeing that it doesn't. And so basically we're looking at, in the near future, the end of bureaucracy. Businesses just will either have to adapt and end their bureaucracy, or else they'll fail. And so that's where we're coming in with, hey, this is how you end your bureaucracy. What was your other question?
Well, just asking you to comment on the 50% hit to productivity as an estimate. I mean, it's not precise, but
yeah, the cost of bureaucracy is pretty astronomical, and we're very roughly ballparking that, but it's probably a very conservative ballpark on the cost of bureaucracy. The wealth that we create in an economy is almost perfectly and fully correlated with the amount of entrepreneurship in that economy. And it's not necessarily just the amount of entrepreneurship; it's the type of entrepreneurship. Economist William Baumol explained that there's different types of entrepreneurship. Some of it's unproductive or even destructive, and if you have an economy with a lot of unproductive or destructive entrepreneurship, that doesn't lead particularly to a lot of growth. But if you have a lot of productive entrepreneurship, innovation, value creation, that's where growth comes from. And what happens though is when you shift your business out of entrepreneurial mode, out of venture mode, into administration mode, you turn off that entrepreneurial engine, and you're not creating new value anymore. You're just replicating your previous value. And that lasts for as long as you can make it last, right? You're trying to keep competitors out. You're trying to snuff out the entrepreneurship that could be coming into your industry so that you can stay competitive and stay ahead, rather than embracing that entrepreneurial spirit and pushing that industry forward. And so the competitive dynamics are towards stagnation rather than growth, which is really interesting. And so what you end up getting is a lag, a stagnant economy, a stagnant industry, and it just snuffs out the growth potential that the economy has. And you see this also in the bureaucracy of the government and its regulations of business. You know, the amount of bureaucratic regulations that have mounted over the years has reduced entrepreneurial productivity by a ton. So, yeah, we just need to end it and unleash the growth potential of entrepreneurship.
We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course. For entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry, our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. Go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link. Well, let's make that switch then. The alternative that we're proposing in the book, we call it venture mode. Let's flip to that, and let's at least attempt to summarize it at a high level, Mark, and then we'll dig into some of the details.
Yeah, so I mean, you're welcome to comment as well as a first author of this book. But venture mode is basically running your organization in the mode of an entrepreneurial venture, right? As agile, as adaptive, as innovative, trying to figure out what's the best thing we can do for our customer instead of trying to maximize profits or get one up on the competition. So you're shifting your focus away from your internal processes or your industry dynamics, and you like a venture, you're focused not solely but primarily by orders of magnitude greater on your customer's experience of value. You are trying to maximize what they get out of your service, out of your product. And that is going to entail all kinds of innovation, of empathy that we've talked about, and communications. And inevitably that just busts the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy inhibits that process of improvement. So that's the baseline. That's the kind of the general gist of what venture mode means.
Yeah, and one of the ways I think of it, Mark, is it's a reversal of thinking. So as you said, management mode or admin mode focuses on internal processes and methods and metrics, and venture mode focuses on the customer. So it's an external viewpoint. What's going on with the customer in the market? How are they feeling? What do they need? That's the big question for entrepreneurs. They call it product market fit in Silicon Valley. We call it identifying needs and tailoring solutions to that need. And then the flow is all from the customer getting that information, getting that insight into where it needs to be inside the corporation, to the people who can develop innovation, can develop services, can bring new ideas to the marketplace. And then there's that iteration back and forth, the recursiveness of, here's my idea to solve your need problem. What do you think? You get an assessment, it comes back. So it's an entire reversal of the way of thinking of admin mode.
And once you get that success, that's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in venture mode, you are not happy with your current success. You're always pushing it forward.
Yeah, that's an important point. And so let's just solve one definitional issue that people struggle with. We use this term entrepreneurship to mean this method of focusing on the customer, listening to their needs, solving for those needs, dealing with the back and forth of getting things right. All the power is with the customer. We call that entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is always associated with small businesses and startups, but we're saying, hey, it scales. It goes to the big corporation. So can you just comment on that for people, Mark?
Yeah. So in entrepreneurship theory, the way we define entrepreneurship is the intentional pursuit of new economic value. I mean, there's different ways that we define it, but that's the central. That's the way I like to define it. And what we mean is it's management or even administration, if you will, if you're just replicating value propositions that have already been proven. Entrepreneurship is looking for something better. So, yeah, a lot of new businesses, new ventures, almost all of them are entrepreneurial to some greater or lesser degree, because they are trying to create new value that didn't exist before with their new venture. Sometimes that's a radical, what we call a rogue venture, a rogue entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's something small like opening another laundromat, right? But that's still new value for that neighborhood. But big businesses do this all the time also, and they should, right? So you get Amazon, you get Apple, you get Tesla, or all these companies looking for the new and better. They have people always looking for new ideas. That's entrepreneurship, even though it's inside a large organization. So entrepreneurship is an economic function. It's not a small business per se. It's something that businesses do.
Yep. Yeah, so establishing entrepreneurship as a function, a business function of new value creation is the way to think. And segueing there from ways to think, we sometimes say entrepreneurship is a mindset. What would the leaders of these companies, these big companies, the CEOs and the C-suite and the big thinkers in central planning and strategy and so on like that, what would be the biggest mental model shift, if you could think about that, to get from administration mode to venture mode? We can work on the mechanics, but what's the mental model shift?
Well, we go through the principles of venture mode in the book, and they're all important components of it. I think probably the biggest fundamental paradigm shift that leads from administration mode to venture mode is that focus from either internal processes or industry dynamics, competitive dynamics, to a relentless focus on customer value. And I think all businesses understand that customer value is super important. But when they focus on those other things, they're looking at the competition, when they're looking at their internal processes for efficiency and looking at the numbers and stuff like that, that customer experience becomes either secondary or tertiary. It's just not the primary focus and drive. when it should be the opposite. That customer experience has to be, at the forefront of everything that they talk about, because everything else just contributes to that, right?
Yep.
And that's the I think that's the core of the shift.
Yeah, and I think there's a subset to that, Mark, and it stems back to what they teach in business school, which is a lot of the management methods coming from the positivist foundations that you talked about aim at control and prediction. So, control, I've got to have steady quarterly earnings. I've got to, as you say, maintain my market share. It's all a control function. And then part of that is prediction. I don't want volatility. I don't want lots of ups and downs. I don't want my market share to erode. I've got to be able to predict the future. And both of those are both detrimental and impossible in the mode that you're talking about, where we're trying to serve customers who are looking for something new, and they're changing their minds all the time, and their priorities change, and everything you said about social science. So somehow we've got to give up this idea of control and predictability and substitute that relentless focus on value, which includes creativity and innovation and projects that don't work and projects that do. And so that, I think that's a big mindset shift too.
Yeah, I like to point out to students that customer loyalty, which has become this big, huge concept in marketing research and in the industry, it's a myth. Customer
Mhm.
loyalty is a myth. Customers are not loyal. They stick. They might feel loyal, or it might kind of have that sense of a loyalty, but it's not a real loyalty, right? It's they like you because you are making their life better. That's what we're talking about, right? And as far as they know, you're the best. You're making their life better than anyone else in that particular way. And that's not real loyalty. That's just they like you because you're better. If someone else comes around and does it even better than you're doing it, their loyalty's gone. They're not gonna just like keep sticking with you just because you helped them in the past. That's not how it works, right? We're not. And so, I, you know, yeah, that prediction, as you were saying, it's a problem that for businesses to because we want to think people are predictable. We want to treat them as statistics. We want to analyze the numbers. We want the numbers to match before and after, and it just doesn't really work that way in dynamic entrepreneurial markets.
Right. Yeah, and in fact, the entrepreneurial market, this variable customer, in many senses, it's a low information market. It's not about data, and it's not about analytics. It's not about pattern recognition, because we're always looking for things that are outside the pattern. That's the anomaly, and that's the opportunity, and it doesn't subject itself to data analytics.
Hmm.
I just say one more point before we wrap up this session is this applies equally to business customers as it does to consumers. We tend often to talk about consumers and consumer taste and that kind of thing, but customers are customers whether it's for another business. And I always try to inject the idea of NVIDIA here. Currently, I think the world's most highest market cap company, and they've got customers, and those customers they're feeling the future. There's a possibility out there that they'll create these businesses that are going to have huge revenues. They're not sure about it, but they certainly want to feel good. And part of feeling good is having the latest chips from NVIDIA and having those put in their data centers and having those data centers come up quickly, all of which are services that NVIDIA provides. And it's all part of this serving the customer, understanding what the customer wants, trying to think what the customer wants next, because it's always going to change. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, and let me add that the customer of the business to business model is different from the consumer, but you also have to keep the consumer in mind, because the consumer is your customer's customer. And so for your customer to succeed, they have to make the consumer better off, and they have to want what your customer is providing. And so you can do your job for your customer better if you understand your customer's customer. And so a lot of business to business producers don't look that far ahead, and it makes them less competitive, less desirable.
Yeah, and to that point, OpenAI is going to make $200 billion in user revenues because users find a benefit of using ChatGPT to answer their questions and have debates and so on like that. Their lives are improved. It's better than it was before, and that's the ultimate creation of value. So let's wrap up this section, and we'll flip to the next episode. We're going to talk about business education. If the MBA is the problem, we have a solution. So, Mark, I'll talk to you next time, and we'll move on to the solution.
All right. We'll see you soon.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode. And check hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.